Kia ora, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Untidy. My name's Hannah Davison. I'm an author, podcaster, mother of two, mother of a teenager now, 13-year-old boy,
Oh
and
my
my
goodness.
11-year-old daughter. I still can't, I'm still adjusting to this. This is still a lot. He's not teenager yet, though, so I feel like I'm fooling myself. But very happy to be back today with my beautiful sun-kissed co-host, Matilda Green.
Thank you very much. Do you know this is the most tanned I've ever been in my entire life? And it's still not even that tanned, but this is a big deal for me. So I'm very excited. Anyway, my name's Matilda Green and I have 3 children. They are 6, 4, and 2. So we're kind of on the other end of the spectrum, not quite teenagers yet. And a little Jack Russell named Buster. But today's episode, I'm very excited about it because it's all about play and why it matters so much more than we sometimes realize. Because I really love that parenting has kind of pivoted in recent years to have a big focus on prioritizing play, as we now have a growing understanding of how central that actually is to children's learning, connection, and development. Because play is where kids experiment, build skills, express themselves, and make sense of the world. But there's always so much information coming at parents, and I think it can feel a bit confusing about what actually matters most or how we can best support our kids and get involved in their play. So joining us today is Dr Annette Henderson. Annette is a New Zealand child development expert and is a full-time professor at the University of Auckland, specialising in the development of communication and cooperation in children. Annette is also the director of the Early Learning Lab and the Centre for Developmental Science. And Annette is here to help us unpack what's actually happening in children's brains during play and how things like building, imagining, problem solving, and playing alongside others support cognitive, social, and emotional development. And she'll also help us understand how parents can feel more confident following their child's latest infatuations without worrying about how to get involved or second guessing themselves. So, a very warm welcome to Untidy, Annette.
Kia ora. It's so nice to be here.
Oh,
Well,
we're very excited to have you with us.
love talking about play, and especially sometimes I don't feel like I'm particularly good at play or at particular types of play. So finding where there's easy access points for maybe when you feel like you're a parent who's, I don't know if I'm good at play. Like I can be silly, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm good at play. So the easy access points is a really good place to look at. But Annette, for parents who might not be familiar with what you do in your work, can you tell us a little bit about what you study and what originally drew you to child development?
Sure, happy to share a little bit about what I do so that you know where I'm coming from. So, as a professor in psychology, I have a few different roles in my life, or my work life, I suppose. We have lots of other roles as well. One of those roles is teaching university students. So, there I like to try to impart my passion for children's development to kind of future budding researchers or thinkers of children's development. But the reason why I really got into the career that I have is because I'm so curious, or I was always curious about what children are thinking, because you look at them and you know they're thinking something and they might not always be able to communicate with you what they're thinking. So I started my research group, which is the Early Learning Lab in the Centre of Developmental Science at the University of Auckland. And there I have a team of students and other team members who study many different aspects relating to children's development. And the core of it is trying to understand how children start to be able to communicate and work together well with other people. So that's language development and social development. And interestingly enough, relevant to today's topic, we learn about those things really through a lot of play right from the start.
It's such a fascinating area because I find children's play just so interesting and how they sometimes like act out situations that they've experienced. They kind of play them out. It's really fascinating. So we can get into that a little bit later. But child brain development, it's a big and kind of daunting topic, but we do like to keep things quite practical here. So would you mind starting by telling us if there was one thing you wish every parent understood about their child's brain, especially in the early years, what would that be?
I really like to think about or talk to parents about just how active their child's brain is. Now, we all know that our brains are active throughout the lifespan. We're constantly, right, learning new things and unlearning things we learned before. And that's where that phrase, use it or lose it, comes from. But what's remarkable about early childhood is that brain development is happening at such an incredibly rapid rate. They're always forming new connections and learning new things. And so when you see babies, even from kind of the moment they're born, they're constantly, looking around, taking in new information. And that has led kind of researchers to talk about children as little scientists. So they're looking around the world, trying to make sense of all the different kinds of things they're seeing and hearing, and they're forming new connections in their brain. And so the reason why this is really important for parents is because I don't know if you're like me, but I always felt like I always had to, as a parent, feel like I have to always teach my child things. I'm like, I always have to be on. And so for parents to kind of really to be able to appreciate just how active children are in their own learning, we can kind of maybe relax a little bit and just know that they're constantly observing what we're doing and they're learning even if we aren't directly teaching them. Now, that doesn't mean we want to let children kind of go and not interact with them at all. Children do need to have those interactions with their caregivers, especially those ones that are nice and warm and sensitive to what the child needs. But we just don't have to be on all the time because children are actively learning as they go.
It's quite a relief. But like I remember also hearing about how like maybe some of the best things you can do is for them to just be like seeing your face and you're just talking and interacting and like sharing a lot of words with your children and sharing a lot of expression and presence with your children. Yeah. And that they're just working out so much and their brain is, I mean, you tell me if this is true, but that's really helping their brain grow.
Definitely. So caregivers who are watching their infant and commenting on what they're looking at, right? Saying, oh, do you see that bright red toy? That's so beautiful, isn't it? It's really interesting. Now, of course, a brand new baby isn't understanding those words, but they are starting to, right from the start, make those connections between what they're looking at and they're hearing a warm, comforting voice that's in time, they'll figure out it's relevant to what they're doing. But yeah, it is that shared attention and shared focus where you can start to teach children the foundations of those interactions and give and return type interactions that we hear about quite a lot.
Yeah. And can you explain a little bit about how children can maybe understand a lot more than they're able to communicate back to you? Because obviously the language is developing a little bit more slowly than maybe some of their comprehension of the world.
Yes. So that's touching on kind of the main reason why I got into baby research, because researchers have been studying infant development for so long, but doing so before babies are communicating, because sometimes children don't produce their first words until 12 months of age or even much later. But there's a lot of indicators there that they're listening and understanding what you're saying. So usually around 4 months of age, they'll be sensitive to their name, right? So you'll call your baby's name and they'll turn their head and look at you. So that's that first kind of evidence of that understanding. And so I suppose it's when parents start to get that sense that children are responding to the things that they're saying by either a smile or a giggle or turning their head and eyes to what you're trying to get their attention to. That really shows us that they are understanding and taking part in that two-way communication that is critical to everything we do, basically.
Oh, yeah. We underestimate babies, don't we? We really underestimate them.
We do,
they are
definitely.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Skipping on a little bit from babies and when they're starting to be a bit more mobile and show you what they're gravitating towards. So parents often wonder why children seem to gravitate towards certain kinds of play, whether that's like building or make-believe worlds, more physical play or problem solving. So from a developmental science perspective, how do those play preferences actually emerge and what role does the sort of experience and environment and opportunity have in shaping them over time?
Whew, that's a big question.
It is a big question. As I'm reading that out, I'm like, I'm asking a lot from you because please retain everything I've said. And
yeah, no, that's all right. So I guess where to start is one of the reasons why myself and researchers, I think, find play so fascinating is seems to be a human universal, and actually not even human universal. We see play in different kinds of non-human species. And so it's universal, but different societies and cultures and different species play in very different kinds of ways. So it's universal, but yet very multifaceted, lots of different kinds of ways in which children and individuals play. And so because of those two capacities or characteristics, people have become really interested in trying to understand, where does play come from? What shapes those early play preferences? And I think a couple things to keep note of is there's a general kind of tendency for babies to play initially kind of with their hands and their fingers, right, and doing that sensory motor play. And over time, that development starts to involve objects and other people, and then not just watching other people, but interacting with other people. So there's this general kind of development of that type of play in terms of who you're playing with. But then it's the kind of play. So there's the play which you touched on at the beginning, right? There's object play, there's construction play, pretend play, and imaginative play. So there's a whole different kinds of play. And if we think about it, how the brain is learning and developing, obviously everybody's going to develop their own interests in different kinds of play based on the experiences that they have. Now, what's really fascinating recently is researchers have found some potential evidence of biological characteristics associated with play preferences. So that what I mean by that is when babies are developing in utero, there are some characteristics of the experiences that they're having or the chemicals that they're being exposed to. And by what I mean by chemicals here is these things called androgens, which are basically hormones like testosterone, but there's others as well in the body or being exposed to the fetus. And that presence of those seems to be associated with early play preferences. So a play preference there is that children who have been exposed to higher levels of androgens like testosterone seem to be kind of more prone to engage in motor play and kind of highly physical play. This is just the first step into understanding early biological preferences. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's that kind of question of like nature versus nurture, how the endless question, how much of our influence do we have on our children's play, or will they just gravitate to what they want to play with kind of biologically? But what do we know about how play influences children's brain development kind of overall, regardless of the type of play or who the child is?
Yeah, I think that when we think about how play might influence the brain, it's good to just come back to the point that when you give your child experiences, or the experiences they have will shape those connections in the brain. So let's say your baby's born with specific toy preferences towards, I don't know, let's say cars, let's say vehicles, because that's some of the first things that you might introduce babies to, right? Like little toy cars later on. And caregiver might see, oh, that baby's really attending towards that object. Actually, even before that, let's say the color red, right? So the baby is really interested in color of red. And so then you give them you notice that, and you give them a whole bunch of red toys. And so when we do that, then you can say, okay, there might be this biological basis, but what's even more kind of critical is that caregivers are sensitive to these preferences, and then they'll kind of feed into those quite a lot, right? And from there, those preferences become more ingrained, more kind of things that the child will gravitate toward and learn about. And so you can see how the cycle might develop over time with those socialization influences. And I think that's really important for parents to have a think about, is that not just parents, but the environment that they have, how that shapes those biological, what we might think of as biological predispositions, but you can shape them in different kinds of ways.
And so is that kind of down to just making sure that you've got the opportunity for lots of different types as many times as you can, basically?
Exactly. So I think that if you think about all the different ways in which you can introduce your child to different kinds of objects, it's giving them these opportunities, because in addition to building those connections of things that they like, children are also drawn towards novelty and interesting new things. So, you have all these kind of old toys maybe the child has played with before, but you bring in something new, or a new type of toy of the same kind, and that will help fuel that development in different kinds of ways. And so by building on this idea that familiarity is important, but novelty is also increasingly important, you can bring in new avenues and new directions into that play with children.
Yeah, the toy rotation system is a good one. If only we could just, stick to it. You know what I mean? Like I find that I do the toy rotation and then it's like 6 months before I do it again, or sometimes maybe even longer. So I need to put that in the calendar actually. That's a good idea.
Yeah. And, well, it's really a novelty then, again, after 6 months. Yeah, I was going to say, like, that's where your toy rotation and your toy libraries and stuff really come into their own. So you just, like, you're having that novelty without your entire house being overtaken by toys or having the expense of new toys and stuff like that.
Yes, those toy libraries are just amazing on so many levels for parents' bank accounts, for the environment, and also just capitalizing on the fact that they curate the toys, and they know which ones, the people who run the toy library also kind of know which ones are great for different ages and kind of can help. At least I know the library that we went to, they really helped us try to figure out what was ideal for different ages and what kids might have liked before.
Yeah.
And it's just a nice community as well.
Yeah.
It's important, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then, I guess you're also giving your child that opportunity to experience a lot of different options and toys and just understand more about what they seem to be naturally gravitating towards.
Definitely. And I think that you're touching on, or kind of one important thing to think about. We've talked a lot about children's preferences, but it's also the wanting to expand your child's horizons, right? So you might go and get the toy that they gravitate towards, and you might say, oh, that one's kind of interesting. Let's see if we can introduce this with this toy, or after they've gotten bored with that one toy, and kind of, scaffold or guide your child to different types of toy play.
I love that. We hear about how good building and spatial play and problem solving play is for kids. Like I see it with my kids, especially like when we're doing, Lego play together, how much they get out of it when they can be creative, they can get a bit frustrated and figure out how to get through it. But some children get way more encouragement into that space than others. So how can parents invite kids equally and easily into that kind of play without making it a thing? Because I think kids can sense when you're putting pressure on them, can't they? It's like they can smell it.
Definitely. I think one of the things as parents, we often draw on our past experiences and how we used to play with objects. And I'm sure you've noticed, but play has changed a lot. Like since I was little, there's a whole lot of kind of different types of play that can be had. And I think you brought up Lego bricks as an example. And I think this is the type of play that gives me a nice kind of place to give an example of what parents can do in different settings. So my parents didn't really encourage me to play with Lego bricks as much. And so I didn't really get to experience that construction play. And because I think that how my parents kind of thought of Lego play was that it's to build things. And so if I didn't do that, then that's not a toy or a play thing for me. Other things are better for me. Now there's such a emphasis, not just on the construction play of construction type toys, is that there's the construction part, but then once you construct, you've built this whole world, right? You've built this whole world where you can engage in imaginative play and pretend play with the sets. So let's say, for example, you have a child who might not really be into the construction type play, and that's okay. Different types of children like different types of play, but we still want to encourage those skills because construction play has been linked with things like problem solving, planning, motor ability. So you, as a parent, you could try to say, well, when we build this big castle, we can have a dragon fight and the dragons can fight about the castle, or we can have a fairy princess and we can go collect the fairy princess. So I think what it becomes is using the different types of play to possibly scaffold or guide your child to the type of play that they really want to play, but show that toys can be used in a variety of different kinds of ways. I guess that seems like a little bit of more hard work for parents, but I think that if if you and your child kind of work on that together, it won't become hard work. It just becomes part of the process of learning about each other's play. So I think that
Yeah.
might be how we can kind of guide our children through different types of play, even if they might gravitate towards one over the other.
Mm. And when we're actually playing with our kids, whether that's, sitting down building Lego together or imagining things, mucking around, or sometimes, as a parent, just trying to find a way to lie down and rest while it's still being present with the
Oh,
play.
being the rock.
being
Being the
the-
rock
Yes.
is a great game.
When we are playing with our kids, like what's doing the most work developmentally? Is it like the creativity, problem solving, the connection? Can you just be present? Like what matters most in that moment?
Yeah. This could show my biases a little bit as a researcher, because one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about is about kind of caregiver responsiveness and warmth and attunement to their child. So I think that there can be a time and place for parents to be really active in that play and work on helping their child understand scripts of how people are meant to behave, or help scaffold children's problem solving. But children, again, are really geared towards understanding things on their own and often use play to be able to solve kind of their own problems and work things through. So if a caregiver is there playing their own rock game and just letting, being there as a support, emotional support, where they say, oh, what do you have? Tell me what you're doing now, right? So they can kind of sit there and kind of relax. The parent can sit and relax while the child explains what they're doing, but also just being present and waiting for your child to come to you to show you something or ask something. And you can say, even every couple minutes, if you say, I really like how you've solved the problem of putting those items together, that's responsiveness. That's being sensitive to what the child is doing. That's acknowledging your kind of following what they're doing, but it's their time to play. And I think that's one of the important things is solitary play is an important form of play. It's not you ignoring your child, it's giving them the opportunity to also keep themselves busy and be a little bit more autonomous. And that's okay too. So it's just kind of them knowing that you're there as sense of support if they need it, and also just a little bit, you're interested in what they're doing, but you're not having to be there all of the time. So you can kind of sit back and immerse, kind of listen to their play and just enjoy the sounds of children's playing, which is quite relaxing, actually, if you can do it.
And I think kids do have the ability, like, yes, they are energetic, but they have this ability to have deep focus when they're interested in something and when they're, locked in on something. And it is quite incredible to witness when they're in that deep focus moment. And it's one thing that I'm always really careful never to interrupt if I can avoid it. Sometimes I have to, but even when I want to get in there with them, I mean, like, oh, what are you doing? What can we, can I join in? Because I think this is so important for them to have that deep focus with just them and something else in their play. It's fascinating because I guess kids can sometimes get a bad rap in terms of attention spans, but when they're in, they are in, aren't they? It's incredible.
Definitely
Incredible. I love watching it. Like I love when they get that hyper focus on and they're just like, time does not exist anymore. It's just the most beautiful thing. And I think especially in modern lives as well, you feel like you're a hummingbird, like going from one thing to the next. There's so much multitasking. You're like, oh, this is the time in your life. You can just sink into your play and get lost there and be in your world. And this is the best thing that could possibly be happening. I want to talk a little bit briefly about like being a single parent. You often get affected by play guilt because there's so much less of you to go around that, your kids will be asking you to play and you're like, I have to make dinner. I have to do that. I have to do that. And like so often, sometimes you can feel like you're saying no. And so, as well as sometimes not feeling like I'm good at play, just having less of me available online. But one thing we did recently was my partner actually gave me a set of Lego roses for my birthday, and the kids all had new Lego sets as well. And so we all sat around, and this was a great thing that I did after dinner, because it's something I'm like, I'm sitting, I'm relaxing. This is
There's
really
no jobs.
peaceful. there's no jobs, and we all just quietly built alongside each other and together. Or it was quite good because at one point I got a bit lost, and that will happen. I can ask them to help and step in and help figure it out together. And because like everyone in our family is really into it as well. So it's not, it also, I think for me at the end of the day, being tired, as so many of us are, and not having a lot left, I was like, this is so accessible. It's something that we're all playing together, but we're all relaxed and we're sitting as well. And, we're interacting and helping each other and working on making something. And it was actually just really lovely because everyone who was there was enjoying themselves. And it was just a lovely, like, bonding moment where, cause sometimes we'll watch and we'll get into a TV series or something together, which is just nice, just like simple time, just being together and being present with one another. But this was like, this is relaxing, but we're also creating and playing and building, and we're all like achieving on the same level, and that felt really, really nice. I think getting around the play guilt is something that you have to think about as a single parent, but also like what are the easy wins, and that just felt like a really easy win.
Well, parents have got a lot on these days, like not all families, but a lot of families have two parents working. So it can be tricky, right? Like fitting it in when there is a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done around the house. Parents are working. Everyone can be tired, and it's one of those things where you have to prioritize it sometimes over other things, where like house can be a tip. There's dishes in the sink, or the washing has been in the washing machine for 3 days. Not that I ever do that. Of course not. No. No, I have many times, but sometimes it's like it has to come at the expense of something else.
I think that's so beautiful, and it is important to sit back and kind of be reminded sometimes that being in that shared space together and doing a shared activity that where everyone's present can be such a boost to the family, the kind of the family health and well-being. I think one of the things that I think about a lot, and I think about the research that has been conducted, because there's a whole lot of research on there about, or discourse about, how children spend too much time in daycare, for example, and all those different kinds of challenges that families are having currently. But I mean, traditionally probably as well, it's always about time. And I'm always sensitive and kind of come back to the idea that it's really about quality. Quality is so important. So you could have a parent who is at home with their child all of the time, but doesn't take the time to have those moments of shared activity, or a parent who only sees their child for a couple of hours maybe in a day, or the parents who are sharing co-parenting experiences. It's ensuring you have those times together where you are together and attuned and focused, and making those high quality times in the mass craziness of the current society and living. So I definitely think about quality, and even getting those snapshots of those moments every day would be great, like a little bit of that quality time. And I think parents should take that as a win when they can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
I noticed as my children grew that they started quite early on to form ideas about what kinds of play seemed to be like for them or what didn't. And even though like I wanted to keep things open and explorative, and I was really conscious of that. But so from a developmental point of view, when do children begin to pick up these kinds of messages about play, and how does that usually happen?
Yeah. So as humans, our main job from birth is figuring out what's for us and what's not for us. And so the brain works a lot in these categories. Sometimes we call them like me, not like me, in group, out group, same, different. Our brain kind of does these easy calculations, I suppose, to kind of try to figure out what we're meant to do. And so if you think of children, their main role is to learn how to become bigger people in the societies, right? Adults, grown-ups. Although I think as an adult, we want to go back to childhood sometimes.
I know. It seems so simple, doesn't it, now?
Yeah.
Now that we're out of it.
Yeah, when play was your job, that would be so
Mm.
fantastic, right? So when we think about how the brain works that way, children are looking for information about what is for them or what people like them do. And so they're sensitive to this right within the first year of development. You can see, for example, children start to know their name, then they know whether they're a boy or a girl, and they start building their identities in lots of different kinds of ways from that time. So, with the emergence of that, like me, not like me, you can kind of see, or we can see in development, that children then gravitate towards the things that they've figured out are for them or are for people like them in whatever sense that means to the child.
Yeah. And I noticed that even when we very intentionally tried to keep things really open at home, my
Yeah.
kids still absorb these ideas of what you're just kind of talking about what was expected in play, whether that's colors, toys, themes, or activities. So where do kind of most of those cues tend to come from, and why are they so powerful that they can override our very careful parenting?
Well, children are really observant. So they're watching not just the parents in their world, but also the books that they read, the shows that they're watching, or what they're hearing from other people. So their friends, their peers, or their teachers at their early child care center. And so what that means then is the parents might be creating this carefully scripted environment at home, for example, giving your female child a whole range of different kinds of toys that might go against gender stereotypes, or your male child also different sets of toys that go against gender stereotypes. But when they go out in the real world, they might see less curated examples of what is made for them. So when you go to stores, and if you see the stores that are divided up by pink and blue for the quotation mark girl and boy sections, they see those and can take in that information. Just as if you see children who are particularly interested in animal toys, for example, they'll kind of gravitate towards those and pay attention to who's interacting with those kinds of toys. What are they doing? And so, yeah, it's not just parents that children learn from, it's also other people. But parents, even though we can make our mind up and say, we're going to make sure we're very intentional about parenting, we have these niggly things called biases that even they rear their ugly heads sometimes, and they do it involuntarily. So, for example, if you are a parent who believes that boys shouldn't play with dolls, this is a really easy example for me to give, so I'm just going to give that example. So if you're a parent who doesn't believe that boys should play with dolls, and you see your son pick up a doll and play with the doll, a parent might unintentionally impart their biases by saying, oh, what about this car truck over here, right? So directing their child's attention away from the toy that the parent wouldn't explicitly say that their child shouldn't play with, but for some reason there's something deep down inside that is alerting them that maybe this other toy is more appropriate. Now, we're way better as a society than we have been historically in these kinds of biases, but they're still there because they've been there for many, 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 many years and generations.
But at least we're aware of them now. We're becoming a lot more aware of them. And then once we can do that, then we can notice when they're rising up in us and think, oh, no, I'm going to go against that. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And what can you suggest we do if you've said that and we hear that and we go, I think that's something I might have done, or that's something that I might do. How do we try and avoid doing that instead of being affected by our own unconscious biases from our own upbringings of social conditioning?
Yeah. So I think in that moment, if you kind of realize when you're there, oh no, I just turned my child's attention away from something that they really wanted to do, if you can kind of quickly build on your play script. So you can say, oh, how about this truck over here? Let's put the doll on the truck and let's drive the doll around. So if you realize in the moment, I think there's ways that you could definitely recover without, making it part of the story. Or you could even say to your child, depending on how old they are, you could say, oh, look at this truck over here. How do you think we could play with these things together? And so bring it back to the child to help kind of direct that situation. Because one of the things about play that is, even though we have a hard time defining play, one of kind of the most fundamental characteristics is that it's best when it's child led, when the child is directing and leading the interaction. That's what they're going to find particularly enjoyable. So you could always kind of pass it back to the child to take that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's something that I've kind of learnt being a parent now, because in the early days of being a parent, when one of my kids was like, come and play with me, like maybe we would sit down and building and do some Lego play, and then I'd be building something and he'd be like, let's play this, and I would start building something, and then he'd be like, actually we're building space rockets at the moment, or like if we were doing imaginative play, he'd be like, come and play, and then I'd be like, oh, maybe we could be cats, and he's like, no, we're actually doing it this way. And it made I read something around how children are inviting you into their play. They've kind of got a vision and you're basically there to facilitate what they want that vision to be. And it really helped, because then when I came into play, I could be like, what do you want to do? And then I could throw ideas in and then see how it landed. Be like, okay, this time it's not collaborative. This time you're the dictator in the play, which is fine. And then other times it's a bit more collaborative. But I really liked that they are inviting you into their play, which I think is really special. Like, this is their space. This is their space where they can be creative and make sense of the world around them.
That's definitely an amazing way of thinking about it. Inviting, they're letting you in their space. I love it. And
Yeah.
so I definitely think, that is what play really is. It is about them. It's not a time for us to be teaching how to do things. It's for the child to be working out kind of how to do things. They're not always, using it as a learning place for them to kind of work things through, but it can be that space for them as well. But yeah, child directed, bringing you in, and you might have ideas on how to build on it, but it's kind of like, if you're on the road of play with your child, you want to kind of follow that road, and you don't want to take a hard right turn. You want to take kind of a easy roundabout way of introducing your kind of suggestions, but suggestions that kind of build on what's going on rather than directing, I suppose.
Yeah. And in other types of play, so rough and tumble play tends to show up kind of naturally for kids. So from a developmental point of view, what role does this kind of really physical play serve?
So rough and tumble play is kind of one of the first forms of play that I think was really discussed in the literature. And I suspect that's because it's the play that expands beyond human species, right? Non-human animals engage in these types of play. And the hypothesis about why this play is important is that it's teaching individuals kind of the how to engage with other members of your same age in physical kinds of ways, while teaching you about your power and your strength, but also coordination and turn taking and just that kind of cooperation that involves in play. So when we watch lion cubs, for example, you can see that rough and tumble play. They're jumping on each other and they might nip a little bit, but they're not really biting down hard or pulling out their claws. When children are engaging in this play with adults or with same age peers, they're also not putting their whole entire power on there, right? They're playing and figuring out those physical kind of relationships. It's also a really good spot to get some frustrations out, not in an angry way, but you've got all this energy built up, and rough and tumble play is the place where you can release that energy in a fun, warm, safe environment.
Yeah. And then as the kids get bigger and a bit stronger, then how can parents support that kind of physical play in a way that helps children learn things like body awareness, self-regulation, and reading social cues, while still keeping it safe and enjoyable for everyone? Because sometimes it can be a lot. Like, it sort of starts all fun, everyone's having fun, and then at some point it can kind of cross a bit of a line.
It can. I mean, for me personally, so I have a 10-year-old and he's always been very active in liking rough and tumble play. And it is not my favorite type of play. And ever since he was little, I just didn't feel right. Like hitting my son with a pillow, it just wasn't right. But it's common and it's important and it's fun and it's enjoyable. But I had to kind of step away. But as they get older, the important things about kids is, they're still developing and they're not aware of how strong they become. So I do periodically engage in pillow fights when I really work myself up to do it. And then I realized that he's really getting really strong. And so this reminded me of one of the key points of rough and tumble play is those kind of boundaries. So, you don't put the pillow, you avoid the head. We always kind of avoid the brain because that's really important. We want to keep that safe. And as they get older, it's reminding them, oh, that is too hard. You can't put all your power into that. And so they do learn in a safe space about kind of physical strengths and that they are becoming strong and that there needs to be limits to that power and strength.
Just a funny little story about rough and tumble. So my son Milo rough and tumbles a lot with his dad. And I'm the same as you, Annette. It's never felt really like my comfortable place. I'm not very good at it. I'm not really sure how to do it because, I grew up with a sister who was 7 years older than me. So, I mean, we weren't really ever wrestling, No. But, but one time my husband Art was away doing something and my son Milo was like, let's wrestle. And then I said, okay, yeah, sure, let's give it a go. And we kind of started wrestling and it was like really slow. And then after a while, Milo was like, oh, just wait for Dad. I was like, okay. So it was just like a good little feedback moment of it's not your thing. And I think we can all acknowledge that. And I'll just wait until Dad gets back.
Yeah. You're off the hook. This isn't your strength.
Yeah.
That's funny. And I mean, they must have a routine that they do. And obviously kind of it could be an important space where, for example, say the child does push a little bit too much and hurts the parent a little bit, right? The parent says, ouch, that kind of hurt. And you can use that space to guide kind of apologies, right? And what is the appropriate way to handle when you unintentionally hurt someone. So, yeah, but each parent has their time and a place.
We've all got different strengths.
Yeah. It's funny because my son, who's just turned 13, he does Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so I don't have a hope of beating him in play, but you tap out in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So if I need to, I can tap out and that's a good thing to do. But what's been great about it is they have to learn so much discipline and self-control and also protecting the partner that they are doing the jiu-jitsu with. So, but yeah, I have had to tap out from the odd chokehold for sure. So we do see there are times when our kids will get absolutely fixated on a certain type of play or certain toy or certain interest and they will just gravitate towards that and they might be going down that rabbit hole for months or years. But things in particular for my daughter is animals are a really, really big thing for her. And whether that's been stuffed animals, drawing animals, animal Lego sets, anything animals that's her vibe. Playing with the cats, making props for the cats. I've got a very, very placid cat, thankfully. But what is that about animals that's just so captivating and engaging for them?
I mean, definitely animals are a go-to for so many children. And I think one of the reasons why is linked to the fact that humans are just such a social species. And so if you think about when you watch different kinds of movies, for example, and you see blocks, for example, moving around like they're jumping. I mean, they don't even have faces, but we seem to think that they've got emotions and they're doing something human. So right from the start, we've got this kind of social brain that's geared towards understanding humans, but also social beings. And so when we think about animals, they've got eyes, right? They've got a face. And we know that right from birth, babies have a preference towards looking at things that are face-like. So if you have just anything that has kind of two dots and then another dot like a nose, for example, that screams face to even newborn babies. And so they'll attend more to face-like things. So when we think about animals, well, they have faces. And so babies will find them really interesting to start with. And from there, you gravitate towards playing with them. And you can assign animacy, which is like self-propelled movement or feelings to animals. And so it's really natural for children to want to engage with those kinds of toys and items in a way, and they can do so in a way that's similar to how they might engage with humans. So play out those kind of emotions and those social scripts of, oh, are you doing okay? Can I feed you to make you happy or give you a hug? They provide that kind of space to practice all those different kinds of capacities that we have as humans that we want to practice to become good social partners.
And because, like, I mean, my kids have grown up with animals, with cats and a dog and what have you.
Yeah.
And they get such a great sense of comfort from them, especially like both my kids are pretty sensitive kids, especially my son's very sensitive. My daughter's just obsessed with animals anyway. But I feel like for them, it can also be quite an uncomplicated relationship where there's like a lot of comfort and a lot of connection, and it's very settling for them. Can kids attach to animals like they might attach to a caregiver?
When we think about attachment, the children usually develop this kind of primary attachment, which would be to usually one of the caregivers who is that constant that they go to seek security and comfort on that level. But if we think about using an object to help support their attachment, it's usually not instead of a caregiver or instead of an attachment figure.
Just leave them with the cats.
Yeah. That's a whole other kind of experiment. But what it does do is that it has that kind of, it can be that comfort. I mean, different children attach to different comfort items. And so some children might have a stuffed animal toy, a soft toy. Others might have a blanket. Others might not have a soft toy at all, but just have a kind of a favorite hard toy. And this comforting and this thing that you go to get that external comfort is a typical kind of developmental process. And some children are only in that developmental phase for a short amount of time. Others, it lasts a while. I still have I have my favorite stuffed animal toy still. I don't use it all the time, but I still look at it and I remember, oh, that was so comfortable then. And so definitely you develop these strategies to regulate your emotions, and different children develop different kinds of strategies. So soft toys is definitely kind of one of those items that can lead child to kind of help themselves, soothe themselves, calm down.
Oh, I love that part of our Untidy team, Flicker. She's got two kittens, and when one of her three kids is having a bit of a hard time, she just says, "Do you want to go into your room with the cats?" And she just puts them in their room and then gives them a couple of cats and then shuts the door. And then she said it's like magic. They just kind of have a moment with the cats, with the kittens, and then they come out absolutely fine. So, God, it is amazing, isn't it? Just before I heard you answer a question, and as an example, you said something like, "Oh, I really like the way that you solved that problem," or something. And it got me thinking about praise, because we want to be encouraging when our kids are playing, but sometimes I think praise can accidentally box them in by tying them to who they are or what we expect from their behavior. So how do we praise our kids for what they're doing in a way that's helping them develop confidence? Because I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of like saying they're really good or they're really smart or they're really this, and so then they feel like that's their identity and they have to live up to that.
Definitely. Praise is such a tricky thing because you want to give it to them, but there's a few instances where it doesn't have the intended impact that you want. So, for example, if you do say things like, "Oh, you're so clever," or "You're so smart," that's praise that involves kind of big generalizations, big general statements. And that can result in, some sense of not living up to those standards, or the child not really understanding kind of how they can be so great, but have challenges in other kinds of ways. So you're kind of creating this image of what they are, but they know that they have challenges. And if you say you're so smart, well, what happens when they get something wrong? And then they think, oh, I must not be that smart. So the current kind of evidence about giving praise is we can try to focus more on the process or the actions. So I really like how you're solving that problem, or I really like those colors that you chose, tell me about it. So you're drawing attention to a specific aspect of the behavior instead of saying you're so clever, you're so creative, which is this kind of broad category, which it's hard to assign kind of specific things to. So that's one element of praise. The other one is children are really sensitive to praise that isn't at their appropriate level. So if you've got a 7-year-old and you say something like, oh, it's really great how you push those two things together. Well, that 7-year-old is going to say, well, I've been pushing things together. I've been putting bricks together since I was 3. So why don't you give me a little bit more meaningful praise? And so it is kind of adjusting the praise to that level where you say, oh, those small pieces are particularly tricky. I really like how you carefully picked them up and inserted them in that spots. So you want to praise your child, but you do want to do it in a way that's attuned to what they're doing and also their developmental level.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. I love that. Because it's, oh God, it's like a reflex sometimes, isn't it? Being like, good job. You did, yeah. So smart. And then you just have to be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not too much.
If you do it, like, don't go, oh, no, you're not smart. Yeah. Never mind. You can just fine tune it the next time.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that's so good. Well, Annette, thank you so much for joining us here. It's been amazing. And finally, if parents could take one thing away from this conversation, especially if they're worried about, are they doing play right? What would you want them to remember?
Oh, goodness. There's so many great things. But I think that the key thing for parents to remember is play is probably one of the only things that we as parents don't have to teach our child to do. And it's arguably one of the most important things that children should be doing throughout their childhood. So I encourage parents and caregivers to kind of maybe sit back, see what happens when they really let their child take the driver's seat and see where they take you on their journey of play.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for your time today, Annette. We really appreciate it. And I'm ready to go play with the kids. That's on my agenda for the rest of the day during these school holidays.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been so amazing to chat with you both, and I really have enjoyed it. So, and yeah, have fun playing.
Thanks,
Annette.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we'd love your support to keep making the show. The best thing you can do to help is subscribe by hitting follow in your podcast app and leaving us a little 5-star review. You can also now watch and subscribe on YouTube and check out how these millennials are keeping up with the cool kids on TikTok and the gram. Lastly, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can keep building this supportive community, keep giving you untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
Don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order. Lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people who make this podcast possible. Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, Maxine London Creative for editing this episode, and Lana Byrne for creating our social content. And to you, our listeners, Araha nui, take care. We'll see you soon.